Well, in the studio with me, we have Patrick O'Flynn to run through the papers. There's a lot you've picked out this morning for us.
Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
Yes, now, I'm quite interested in the Sunday Telegraph front page because it features Wes Streeting and Labour's NHS reform plans. Now, Labour don't have many leading figures these days who would naturally appeal to either floating voters or centre-right voters, and Wes is supposed to be the poster boy for that kind of reincarnated Blairism, perhaps you would call it. And he's got a splash on the Sunday Telegraph. Labour press team will be very pleased with that. But it's all, I have to say, it's desperately thin stuff. The headline is that Labour will tell NHS workers to work weekends and evenings. But if you dig into the story, it's just they're going to offer them overtime rates of pay and ask them to do that. There's this story, this line about 40,000 extra operations or appointments a week, and it's implied that, again, closing tax loopholes, non-dom stuff will magically pay for that. I think we need to see a bit more detail on that. And Wes presses all the right sort of buttons, saying that we're too reliant on overseas doctors and nurses. We should train more of our own. He makes a perfectly sensible point that we have lots of brilliant young people with straight A levels who want to be trained as medics who can't be because we have a cap in place. But again, he doesn't really come out with a pledge as to whether Labour will fund the scrapping of that cap, because it costs a lot of money to train medics, and what would be in its place. And the most pie in the skyline, I think, is he's talking about a sort of weekend or evening surgeries which will be able to do a week's worth of procedures in a day. Now, if that were possible, don't you think somebody else might have tried it?
A week's worth of procedures in one day.
Yeah, so miracle worker Wes Streeting. I think that's sort of hope over experience, I have to say.
On the headline in the Telegraph, at least, Labour will tell NHS staff to work weekends. Now, I imagine a lot of doctors and nurses and general staff in the NHS will say, hang on a minute, we already do work evenings and weekends. I guess this is an attempt to get more of them to do so?
It sounds like it. I mean, it's very vague, but it sounds like there'll be a pot of money to offer overtime rates for more weekend and evening shifts. Now, some of us might think that's rather unambitious. You know, there are organisations employing many fewer than 1 million people that the NHS does that are able to offer a proper 7-day-a-week, 24-hour service with no sort of skeleton staffing involved. So, you know, we would like, I think, most of us to have a health service where your chances of survival don't depend on the day of the week and the time of the day in which you fall ill.
Well, yes, and it will be interesting to see what Wes Streeting has to say later on in the show about the reaction from the BMA, the trade union. What might they have to say about this? I know they've been quite hostile to Wes. He's admitted that in the past over question marks of the word privatisation and using private facilities and that sort of thing. So what will they have to say about this?
Well, I think better relations with the NHS unions are about the only kind of real potential benefit I can see in Labour's plans, because they've given the Tories a really tough time. And some of that, I think, people look at the sort of things the junior doctors on strike have been chanting. They just appear overwhelmingly left-wing. So perhaps they would give a Labour government a slightly easier ride.
I guess, on the other hand, they might have more power. To push Wes on policy.
They might do, and they will know that, obviously, if Labour doesn't deliver on the NHS, that will be a kind of massive political problem for Labour, so they have plenty of leverage. While we're on the Sunday Telegraph, I must just mention there's a rather nice picture to sort of cheer Tory spin Dr. Hearts of Rishi Sunak.
Yes, lift up a little bit higher.
Yeah, watching Southampton with his mum and dad, and they got to the Championship playoff final. It makes him look normal, and I think his dad's got the kit on, the shirt on, and it makes a change from the sort of Prada loafer, Rishi's a billionaire type.
Well, we
don't
know what he's got on his feet.
We
Patrick.
don't quite, but I don't think they're Prada.
He might have his sneakers on.
So nice picture, Rishi.
Sticking with Labour, though, for a moment, front page page of The Observer. The Archbishop of Canterbury urges Keir Starmer to ditch the cruel two-child benefit cap. What are we to make of this?
Well, I think in recent years, the Church of England has maybe become the Labour Party at prayer. You know, I'm old enough to remember when they called it the Tory Party at prayer, but it seems
I'm sure they deny that.
Right, well, it seems Justin Welby is out-lefting the Labour Party by saying that this calculation where most benefits are calculated to a maximum level as if the claimant family only had 2 children is cruel, and it's accentuating child poverty, and that every child is of equal value. Now, I'm not particularly wedded to this two-child benefit cap. I think even Suella Braverman wrote an article recently saying maybe it should be reviewed. But I have to say, whenever Justin Welby comes out with a position, I find myself instinctively taking the opposite one. So the fact he's so remorselessly politically correct, left-wing, wanting to expand state spending, he's always on one side. So it makes me think perhaps there's good reasons for the two-child benefit cap. And the greatest cure for child poverty is to get parents into full-time, decently
And we know the government
employment.
are trying to do that.
Yeah, so I think
at great cost.
Yeah, and I think Labour and Starmer will be very resistant to being pushed around by a left-wing cleric, albeit the most senior one in the country.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because, if the cost of living weren't so cripplingly high for young families, this benefit may well not be needed. But that's where we are. That is where we are. Shall we move on to the front page of the Mail on Sunday? Because we have Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, up in a little bit on this show. And he won't like the look of this front page, will he?
No, and I think when you're Defence Secretary, there are more people in that department, I think, trying to embarrass the Secretary of State than almost in any other department, maybe setting aside the Home Office. And the classic sort of defence embarrassment story is when something is leaked that implies the country can't put on a show, can't put on a military show. And the Mail on Sunday has this story that we've only got one plane available to drop members of the paratroop regiment out on the D-Day 80th anniversary, and that our contribution to the commemorations will be put in the shade by other countries with much sort of more panache. Now, I have to say, in the actuality, when the events happen, I think it's one of our strengths doing the pageantry and the heritage stuff. And I think there will be enough planes and we won't look weak compared to the other countries.
And I'll ask Grant Shapps about this, but it seems, according to this exclusive in the Mail on Sunday, that it is a source from the parachute regiment itself that is saying all of this stuff to the paper, saying that we don't have adequate numbers of aircraft by any means, and that this shows how feeble we may look.
Yes, and they're saying that a group of planes, I think C-130 Hercules transport planes.
Well,
I'm not a defence expert, but that might be approximately right, that they've been pensioned off a bit too early and they've left us with a shortage there. And this shows that, again, the line of defence is very thin these days. But I'm sure the government would say, well, look, we are raising the share of national income on defence and putting tens of billions of pounds.
But it's how it's spent, isn't it?
Yes,
and these shows are important. We're going to have to move on to our next story because we're running out of time. Right. This is woke madness on the front of the Sunday Express. What's this about?
Well, woke madness, I think, is the Tory cabinet like to get on the side of anti-wokeism because it's one of the few things they think they can just sort of growl about and it will resonate with most people. Now, this is Kemi Badenoch, who normally when she makes a media intervention, there's a very detailed plan. She doesn't usually just do waffle, Kemi. Now, she's got the splash on the Sunday Express by just telling companies, end woke madness, cut down on the diversity, inclusion, politicising your products.
Is this her place to tell private companies what to do? It's one thing talking about the civil service, it's one thing talking about our public institutions, but is it her place to tell private companies what they should do?
Yes, I think it is, and I think cabinet ministers should have more flair in using their influence on this kind of stuff.
Do you really? Interesting.
Absolutely. It's not compulsory, but she's saying, people buying ice cream don't want to know the ice cream supports Palestine or whatever. The interesting thing here is that she's got the splash further into the Sunday Express. Esther McVey, who is, quote, the Minister for Common Sense, has also got a very similar story, but she's relegated inside. And I feel a bit sorry for her. She made a big speech last Monday that got gazumped by the Prime Minister deciding to make a speech. And one of her things was she was going to ban rainbow lanyards from the civil service. And it turned out there was going to be no such ban. And Grant Shapps himself then came out and said he didn't mind that sort of thing. So everyone seems to be relegating Esther and trampling over her.
That's another thing to ask Grant Shapps about if we get round to it. Why did you not stand by Esther in her calls to scrap these lanyards? Thank you very much, Patrick.
It's my pleasure.
Been a fantastic newspaper reviewer, Patrick O'Flynn there.